Witches have always been fixated on in pop culture, whether that is in documentaries, movies, or TV shows. However, their portrayal has universally stuck to a singular archetype, the female witch. Films like Hocus Pocus and The Craft
You don't even exist to me! You don't even exist.
often depict these women as haggard or scary looking figures, wielding dark magic on those who cross them.
Are shit. You don't exist.
While the image of the female witch dominates the media, when diving deeper globally into the historical context of witches, one may discover the Icelandic witch trials. At about the same time as the Salem witch trials, Icelandic men were under persecution for the same thing. The contrasting gender differences in New England and Icelandic witch hunts can be attributed to cultural beliefs about gender roles, societal anxieties, and power dynamics, with Icelandic hunts focusing on men due to threats to authority, and New England hunts targeting women due to social destabilization using women as scapegoats. Deeply influenced by Puritan ideals, the Salem witch trials took over New England in the 17th century. Beliefs of supernatural spirits and devilish influence caused many to become paranoid of why their crops were failing or why their children were becoming sick. Many needed something or someone to blame, causing the idea of witches to come about. It was a mystery as to why things in their town were failing or people were dying. All they could go off was their own intuition, what the majority was saying, or what the religious teachings they followed had taught. Salem society was permeated with religion, specifically the Puritan religion, which was harsh on sin. The Puritans believed that witchcraft was a form of God's punishment for committing a sin, in which neighbors would turn against one another and the devil would be able to turn the individual into a witch. Bridget Bishop is one of the most famous cases dating back to the Salem witch trials. Bridget Bishop was seen as peculiar in Salem's small village town. She was blamed for her first two husbands' deaths and had a hard time molding to the expectations of the Puritan society. The question of whether she was executed for actually bewitching others or just because she was different from the societal expectations at the time still persists, but we can delve a bit deeper into that when looking at the dynamics of witch hunts in Iceland. During the 17th century, Iceland was empowered by Danish authorities. Contrasted from Salem, some magic was viewed as good in Icelandic culture. Folktales and myths were common, and many believed or practiced them like a religion. These folktales were harmless, telling stories ranging from the origins of elves to mermaids. Icelandic culture, though, influenced by Danish culture, quickly created a distinction between these magics. In order to create a more conformed religious society, as hints of Christianity spread, authorities started to crack down on what magic could and could not be practiced, with some magic being punishable by death. Some examples of Icelandic magic can be viewed today in Icelandic museums, one being the practice of necropants. According to legend, a sorcerer is first supposed to make a pact with the living man that he will use his skin, specifically skin from the lower body, to wear his pants after he dies. After this individual dies, the sorcerer then skins the lower body and wears the skin like pants. One intricate detail the sorcerer must not forget is the coin he must steal from a poor widow and place it under the skin as if it were in a pocket. After this, the sorcerer is supposed to be rich forever. It has been found that 89% of witchcraft prosecutions in New England were women, while 92% of witchcraft prosecutions in Iceland were men. The primary reason specific people were persecuted versus others, according to most research in most countries, was because someone was a weak link in society or an outcast. These people were mostly hung, and happened to also be mostly women. Research on other countries, where men have been the primary target as witches, has shown that it has more to do with a power dynamic. People who were able to read and write, which usually were more powerful men in society, were the ones that had fingers pointed at them. These men were mostly burned. In Iceland, the texts that were associated with witchcraft were studied more by intellectuals, which was a group dominated by men. Therefore, the people that were being burned and blamed for sorcery, or the only people that could read and understand the magic text, were men. Women were not usually used as scapegoats since their involvement could not necessarily have taken place. They were not in the position to obtain any texts like these, let alone read them. In Iceland, it was about power and whoever was intellectual or powerful enough to have a threat on authority. They played the blame game not on women who were seen as outcasts, but more on men who had the ability to have a great influence. Although more recent theories have considered the idea of maybe bad bread being a reason for women being targeted in Salem as witches, possibly linking the trials to hallucinogens released from the bread, women were primarily targeted in most places, not just Salem, and men were targeted in more Nordic countries. While these ideas may have had influence on the targets put on people's backs in different countries, there are still many different reasons that the gender differences were prominent in witch hunting during the 17th century. Gender roles, societal anxieties, and power dynamics all played a role in why certain people were burned, exiled, or hung during the major witch craze. Men in Iceland were targeted if they were powerful or intellectual enough, while women in Salem were targeted if they were outcast and easy to blame.